Humanities, Episode 3, Empire. In legend, the founding of Rome began with twin brothers Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars and a Vestal virgin called Rhea Silvia. In infancy, they were abandoned and raised by a wolf who suckled them and a shepherd who raised them. Upon their maturity, they decided to found a city. Conflict between them led to tragedy. Romulus wanted to build the city upon Palatine Hill, while Remus wanted to build it on Aventine Hill. And of course, each wanted to rule. Romulus began building his city, and he constructed a wall for it. But Remus jumps over the wall into his territory, which angers Romulus, and so he kills his brother Remus. So we have an early example of fratricide, much as in the case of Cain and Abel. Romulus then goes on to found the city of Rome on Palatine Hill around 750 BCE and becomes its first king. Now, of course, while the myth is dramatic, it's not really the real story. In actuality, a group of people known as the Latins founded the city in the 8th century due to its strategic placement. The goal was to push out the original inhabitants of the Italian peninsula, the Etruscans. This would take time, but with the location of the city, the Latins had the advantage. Rome was at the center of the peninsula. It had a navigable waterway called the Tiber, which led in both inland as well as to the sea, and it was built on high ground across 7 hills. So if you're not familiar with the layout, of course, you have the Italian peninsula here, which kind of looks like the boot. In the city of Rome is really right kind of at the center, at the kneecap of that city, peninsula rather. And then you can look over here and you'll see the layout of the 7 hills focused around there. There's the Palatine Hill, which in the mythology Romulus wanted. There's the Aventine Hill, which again Remus wanted. And you can see actually Remus's suggestion is probably the better one because it's right on the Tiber River, giving it better access to navigation and things of that nature. Now the Etruscans are going to rule for a few more centuries, but in 509 BCE, the Latins defeat them and kingship gives way to republic. And this is one of the reasons that men such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson used Rome as a model for American independence. The Roman Republic is going to last from roughly 509 to about 30 BCE. Within its first 200 years, it had spread from the city to include the whole of the Italian peninsula. It became embroiled in a 150-year conflict called the Punic Wars, which ended with the destruction of the city of Carthage in Africa in 146 BCE. This is going to give Rome complete control over the Mediterranean Sea. The growth of Rome is going to allow for prosperity and power, but of course only for some. As the patrician classes got richer, the plebeians got poorer, and there was great unrest. And it's these factors that are ultimately going to lead to the establishment of the empire and the collapse of the republic. In 46 BCE, Julius Caesar used this instability to seize power. Now, he had been a great military commander, and he wrote about his exploits in what is likely the first military campaign autobiography in history called Commentaries on the Gallic Wars. Gaul was the name they used for what today would be France. As a military commander, he knew how to regulate, he knew how to control. He was very organized. And so Caesar is going to take dictatorial control over Rome. But as he does so, he brings a lot of very important reforms. He will expand citizenship, granting more and more people the ability to become citizens of Rome and all the privileges that come with it. He regulates taxes. He does some other things that are really aimed towards helping the plebeians. But of course, reforms of that nature are going to concern many of the patricians and the ruling classes. So on the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 BCE, he was assassinated by an angry mob stirred up by Brutus. About a millennium and a half later, William Shakespeare will immortalize Caesar and his tragic death in one of his most popular plays. So this image is something that remains with people down through the ages and was worthy enough that even Shakespeare memorializes it. With the death of Julius Caesar, a power play began for control between Mark Antony and Octavian. In 43 BCE, Octavian took control of the Roman Senate, and the Roman Senate created him ruler for life. He was declared princeps, first citizen, and imperator, supreme general. The Senate granted him the title of Augustus, which means the revered one, in 27 BCE, and he would henceforth be known as Caesar Augustus, a name that I'm sure many of you have heard in the telling of the Christmas story. Augustus is going to begin what becomes known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And this is a period of relative stability and peace that lasts from about 30 BCE to 180 CE. And this general stability is a time which is going to allow for the flourishing of art, literature, and philosophy. Speaking of philosophy, a lot of the philosophy at this time seems to have been taken from the Greeks. So let's not forget that the Hellenistic period that we talked about last time overlaps with the first century of the empire. And the Romans did have a tendency to assimilate as they grew. However, one philosophical tradition, Stoicism, is uniquely Roman, and it grew to be the philosophy of the empire. Essentially, Stoicism is focused on living a virtuous life, much as Aristotle described. We should act with self-control and seek inner peace to try to overcome life's troubles. It will point out that some things can be controlled and some things can't. So don't let those things that can't be controlled bother you. Focus instead on what is within your control. Focus on living a life of virtue and, much like the Taoists, live according to nature rather than fighting against it. There's a natural order, a natural flow to the universe, so we should live within it instead of fighting against it. Basically, Stoics, such as Seneca, who you'll see pictured here, and Marcus Aurelius, who you see in the bust there, they taught that we should focus on the things that we can control. Make sure that we are putting our efforts and emphasis upon the things that we have a chance of altering or changing or controlling. We should accept external events. This is a concept that's going to be used later in philosophy, referred to as amor fati, that there are things that are beyond our control. There are things that we can't do anything about and just accept them. We need to practice virtue, and specifically the Stoics insisted upon wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance as being the most important of those virtues for us to practice. We should see hardship as opportunity. Of course, nobody wants to run into hardship and difficulties, but when they occur, instead of allowing them to bring you down, see them as an opportunity for you to show your resolve, to find ways of overcoming them, and making the best out of those situations that you can. It's an opportunity to strive and to overcome. And finally, they taught that we should live in the present moment. Don't dwell on the past. Don't think too much about the future, but live in the moment right here and right now, because that's the only real reality. Now, while Stoicism, had this very strong philosophical basis, while it certainly promoted some positive virtues, it was unfortunately going to be transformed over time into a political theory, which is going to place our duty to the state first and foremost. Our duty to the state is what ultimately matters. And so we are rejecting our own wants, our own desires. We are pushing aside our own interests to make sure that we are doing what is best for the state. The basic argument was that the only rights that you have are guaranteed to you by the state, and therefore the state must be protected and must come first. This will lead to, of course, great sacrifice. About 2 millennia later, in the early 20th century, Benito Mussolini is going to use this altered version of Stoicism as a basis for his social and political doctrine of fascism. In terms of literature, Rome's greatest epic is called the Aeneid. It was composed by Virgil around 20 BCE. The work is inspired by Homer, so even here the Greek influence is going to be felt. Like Odysseus, Aeneas, the hero of Virgil's work, is fought in the Trojan War, and he must go on the hero's journey to return home. The goddess Juno will create storms, sending him off course, where he lands in Carthage. He reveals his story to Queen Dido, but Venus interferes, and he causes Dido to fall in love with Aeneas, and she keeps him with her. Once he escapes her, he will make a journey into the underworld where he sees his father, and he learns about Rome's future. When Aeneas finally arrives in Italy, war begins with the Latins over his desire to wed the king's daughter. Aeneas will defeat the king and claim power for himself, and then go on to lay the foundation for the establishment of the city of Rome. We can see so much of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey in this work, which shows that there is a clear influence. The Greeks are influencing the Romans borrowing from the Greeks. But this is not surprising, because Virgil was attempting to offer a mythological origin story for Rome, one that would ultimately rival that of Greece, and also justify the current growth and expansion, as well as the future of the empire under which he served. Now, as we turn from philosophy and literature towards the architectural and artistic wonders of Rome, we find that in building, Rome was unsurpassed in the ancient world. Rome used brick, concrete, everything at its disposal in order to create huge structures, many of which still exist today. So let's consider two, the Colosseum and the Pantheon. The Colosseum is the largest freestanding amphitheater in the ancient world. It was built between 72 and 80 CE. It's 189 meters long, 156 meters wide. Its base is 24,000 square meters, and its maximum height is at 48 meters. Originally, it was called the Flavian Amphitheater, and it could hold between 50 and 80,000 people. This arena was used for all manner of events. There were gladiatorial contests, recreations of historic battles, stage dramas, even mock sea battles took place there. You'll notice the exterior that everybody, I think, is familiar with, but looking inside, you can see the ruins of what remains, and you can see the seating all the way around it. Now, there would have been a floor here for most events that took place, but there was down below this area where gladiators, for example, would be able to wait and train before they were brought forward. Other equipment could be stored down there. But this area could also be left open up, filled with water. And that's what allowed for those sea battles to take place. So it's really pretty remarkable when you think of all that they managed to accomplish within that structure, and the fact that so much of it still remains. Another magnificent wonder of the Roman world is called the Pantheon. And the Pantheon was constructed in 126 BCE on a site previously occupied by an earlier temple, and dedicated as a temple to all the gods by the Emperor Hadrian. The Pantheon is 84 meters long, 58 meters wide, and 58 meters at its greatest height. A very important feature of the Pantheon was the dome. Now, there have been some changes made over the years, but the Pantheon remains a very complete Roman structure. And this is largely due to its conversion to a Catholic church in 609 CE. The Pantheon has actually been in continuous use as a temple or a church for over 2,000 years, and it still is to this day. And so you can see the structure here remaining in the midst of what is built up as a more modern city of Rome, but here is this ancient wonder sitting there. You can see the dome up to the top, and then looking at the interior, this is what it looks like. And there are many structures around the world that have modeled that. The neoclassicist movement that emerges in the 18th and 19th centuries really attempts to revive this Roman style. And so when we look at the image here, this is Jefferson's Rotunda from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. And that's a prime example of that. It is clearly modeled very closely upon the Pantheon. And a lot of early architecture, monuments, and whatnot really were. One last architectural wonder to mention are the Roman aqueducts. The Romans developed a system of pipes and tunnels and bridges to try to transport water into cities and towns across the empire. Whereas people in the past and in other territories would have to carry water from long distances by hand or by cart, the Roman aqueducts made this process considerably easier. It was a system that basically relied upon gravity to move the water from the source into these remote places. And so you can see a remnant of one that remains right there. This bridge would have carried that or transported that water. And in the image here, you'll see, this is a Roman aqueduct compared to a modern one, where we sort of like, we have the ability to create, down through the ground. Here, they would have simply built it in this direction. But you'll notice there's always a gradation going downward, and so it's gravity that pulls that water along. But it was a remarkable innovation, and not only did it make things more convenient, it also helped save a lot of lives in the process, because the aqueducts would provide clean drinking water, which is going to cut down on illness within communities. The water supplied the public baths and the latrines, which were very prominent and popular within Roman society. And it allowed crops to grow in fields that it would have been impossible before because the water couldn't have reached it. And so it makes new territory where food could be grown, again, making conditions better for people. Some of these aqueducts can still be seen, and one in particular, the Aqua Virga, which you see pictured up here. The Aqua Virga was built in 19 BCE, and it is still in use. It actually supplies water to the Trevi Fountain in Rome. Now, at the time that Rome rose to power in the West, the Chinese Empire rose in the East. Between 221 to 206 BCE, the Qin dynasty unified the scattered territories in what became China through the conquest of rival states. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, standardized writing, he standardized a currency, and established measurements. One of the great things that was done during his reign was to construct the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China, as I'm sure you're aware, is a massive structure that is going to take many, many years to build, but it is really the only man-made structure that can be seen from space. Now, the Great Wall is only 6 to 8 meters tall in most places. So it's not going to completely stop an enemy army from coming into this region. But it would mean that that army has to cross very slowly and on foot. Cavalry is not going to make it across. War engines are not going to make it across. And so it's going to make things more difficult. It's going to slow things down, and it will allow the threat to be met by the emperor's army if any time that it arose. And this is the same idea that Hadrian used in Britain to keep the Scots and the Picts out of Britannia. And so you can see Hadrian's wall, which is actually smaller yet, but it's the same basic idea. It's going to slow down. It's going to prevent the transport of war engines, things like that, into the territory. So armies can cross it, but they're going to cross it slowly. They're going to do it on foot, and that gives you time. But one of the most remarkable artistic finds of this period is the Terracotta Army, which was created to protect the tomb of the emperor. Qin Shi Huang was buried in a mound similar to those we've seen before. But more impressively, he was surrounded by pits containing thousands of life-size terracotta soldiers, horses, and chariots. They were created from a mold, but remarkably, every single face is unique. And so you can kind of go through and look at that. I mean, every one of these thousands of figures, every face is unique, every face is different. It represents an actual person. Now, apart from the artistic merit, this discovery is going to give us insight into burial practices and a belief in an afterlife that is not unlike what we saw in Egypt and some of the primal peoples that we've discussed previously. So let's take a moment to play anthropologist. We have an emperor in a burial mound. It's covered by a pyramid. He's surrounded by this massive army, and all of it is covered. So this art was not meant to be seen by the living. They are there to guard the emperor. They are there to escort him to the afterlife. So what similarities can you find between this practice and the earlier cultures that we've studied? And what similarities will we find to future cultures? When you start asking questions like this, when you start thinking in this fashion, then you're thinking like an anthropologist. And that is one of the things that I'm hoping you will learn to do as we go through and talk about all of these wonderful aspects of the humanities.